Eden 7, 4:30 a.m., the calm before the storm. The first explosion rattled the old wooden porch, knocking Elias Carter's coffee cup from his hand. He exhaled slowly, watching as the steaming liquid seeped into the cracks of the floorboards. Another blast followed, closer this time, shaking the very foundation of their farmhouse. From inside the house, Evelyn's voice came, laced with irritation rather than fear. "Elias! Tell me that wasn't our barn they just blew up." Elias stood up, his old bones creaking as he dusted off his flannel shirt. He squinted toward the distant hills where the first streaks of dawn fought against the smoke curling into the sky. "No, dear," he muttered, stepping inside to retrieve his old service rifle. "That was the garage." A brief pause. Then Evelyn sighed. "Oh, they're going to regret that." The council's mistake. The night before the invasion had been quiet. The kind of quiet Elias Carter had learned to distrust. He sat on his porch, an old ceramic mug warming his hands, watching the sky. Stars stretched endlessly above Eden 7, a peaceful backdrop to the simple life he and Evelyn had carved out for themselves. The war had been long over. They had earned this. Then, at 4:30 a.m., the sky burned. A deep tremor shook the ground, rattling the windows. Elias watched as fireballs streaked toward the distant hills. One after another, they slammed into the colony, turning crops and buildings into pillars of smoke. The shockwave hit a few seconds later, a low, bone-rattling roar. From inside the house, Evelyn's voice came, calm but sharp. "Elias! Tell me that wasn't our barn they just blew up." Elias exhaled through his nose, watching the distant plumes of fire licking at the sky. "No, dear," he said, standing. "That was the garage." A beat of silence. Then Evelyn muttered, "Oh, they're going to regret that." Another explosion erupted, this time closer. The enemy was advancing fast. Elias rolled his shoulders, shaking off the stiffness of age. His body might not have been as quick as it once was, but his mind? Sharp as ever. Time to get to work. The first mistake. The Zevkari strike team touched down in perfect formation, their landing crafts kicking up thick plumes of dust. Commander Zilvarn stepped off the lead ship, his imposing form draped in the dark insignia of the Galactic Council's elite forces. His orders were simple: neutralize all resistance, eliminate key personnel, and secure Eden 7 as a forward outpost. His intelligence reports described a weak, aging human population. A forgotten world with no military presence. Good. He liked easy jobs. Gesturing to his second-in-command, Zilvarn spoke in a guttural rasp. "Deploy forward units. Kill anyone who resists." The squad spread out, weapons primed, armor gleaming in the firelight. The colony was eerily still. A few civilians ran for cover, but there were no organized defenses. Just as expected. Then, from the northern ridge, a single loud crack split the air. Zilvarn barely had time to register the sound before one of his officers collapsed, half his head missing. "Sniper!" Another shot rang out. A second soldier crumpled. Zilvarn hissed. "Find them. Now." His men scrambled for cover, scanning the terrain. But the shooter, whoever they were, was invisible. The Reaper's wake. From his vantage point atop the ridge, Elias chambered another round. The old rifle felt heavy in his hands, but the weight was familiar. Comforting. He had always preferred simple weapons, no fancy energy rifles, no AI targeting. Just a solid scope in his own two hands. He exhaled and squeezed the trigger. Below, another enemy dropped. The strike team panicked, breaking formation. Sloppy. Untrained for real war. He almost pitted them. Almost. Evelyn's voice crackled through his earpiece. "I'm in their comms." Elias smirked. "What's the chatter?" Confusion. They weren't expecting resistance. "Their commander is furious. Also, one of them just called you a ghost of war." "Cute," he snorted. "Let's make sure they regret waking the dead." Evelyn had always been the brains behind their operations. Where Elias tore down fleets, she crippled enemy infrastructure before the first shot was fired. And now, her fingers danced across the ancient terminal in their home, rewriting the battlefield before the Council even realized it. Suddenly, the enemy's comms went dead. Zilvarn's forces, now blind, scrambled to regroup. Then the colony's irrigation system exploded, sending plumes of mist into the air. It wasn't just water, it was a carefully dispersed electronic disruptor Evelyn had activated remotely. Every enemy rifle fizzled out. Their visors glitched, turning their HUDs into static. Panic spread. And Elias fired again. The death of certainty. Zilvarn clenched his jaw, trying to control his breathing. The battle was turning. Fast. This was not how things were supposed to go. "Switch to emergency protocols," he barked. "Activate manual targeting. Call in orbital support." No response. His comms were silent. A cold knot formed in his stomach. Someone had hijacked their systems. Then, a voice, smooth, calm, utterly unimpressed, filtered through his earpiece. "Hello, Commander. It's rude to invade someone's home uninvited, don't you think?" Zilvarn froze. A woman's voice. Steady. Measured. Dangerous. "I hope you weren't too attached to your dropships," she continued. "Because I just locked all of them out of your network. Fun fact, they won't recognize your command codes anymore." Zilvarn's blood ran cold. Then, behind him, one of the grounded dropships whirred to life. Engines flared. Auto-turrets rotated. But instead of aiming at the colony, they turned, directly at his forces. His stomach twisted. This wasn't a skirmish. This was a slaughter. Retreat or ruin. From the porch, Evelyn leaned back in her chair, watching the chaos unfold on her hacked console. She took a sip of coffee. "You know," she mused over the open comms, "you could always just leave." Zilvarn's fury boiled over. "You think you can win?" "Oh, sweetheart," she said with mock sympathy. "We already have." The first dropship opened fire on its own troops. Zilvarn barely had time to react before a railgun blast from the ridge ripped through another ship. The burning wreckage spiraled downward, crashing into the battlefield. The few surviving troops scrambled for cover, leaderless and terrified. The fear was spreading. The name, Carter, was already starting to circulate among them like a curse. Zilvarn snarled, backing away. He had underestimated the enemy. The Council had told him these were just civilians. They had never mentioned the Reapers of Eden 7. Final warning. Elias descended the ridge, rifle slung over his shoulder. His movements were slow, deliberate. He stopped at the battlefield's edge, staring at the remaining soldiers. "Go home," he said, his voice steady. The soldiers hesitated. Some looked to Zilvarn. Elias stepped forward, lowering his voice to a growl. "I said go home." They ran. Zilvarn clenched his fists, seething, but he knew defeat when he saw it. Snarling, he turned and boarded the last remaining dropship. The engines roared, and the craft shot into the sky, vanishing into the clouds. Elias watched them go. Then, with a sigh, he turned to Evelyn. "Well," he muttered. "There goes our quiet retirement." Evelyn smirked, sipping her coffee. "Told you peace was overrated." Behind them, the colony stood, battered, but unbroken. The Reapers of Eden 7. The smoke hadn't settled. The bodies hadn't cooled. Yet, Elias knew the battle wasn't over. From the ridge, he watched the retreating dropships vanish into the atmosphere. They were running, but they'd be back. The Galactic Council wouldn't tolerate failure. Especially not at the hands of two old ghosts. Evelyn's voice crackled in his earpiece. "I just intercepted their distress call." Elias sighed. "How bad?" "Bad." A pause. Then, grimly, "They're sending reinforcements. Ground troops. Heavy armor. Full-scale occupation." Elias clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a raid anymore. This was war. Rallying the colony. The colony's square was a mess of dust, debris, and nervous faces. Men, women, even teenagers gathered, whispering, shaken but alive. They weren't soldiers. Just farmers, mechanics, and traders. And now, warriors by necessity. Elias stepped onto a supply crate, surveying them. He could see it in their eyes, fear, anger, uncertainty. He had seen it before, in younger men, in bloodier wars. He raised his voice. Calm, steady, absolute. They'll be back, he said. In force. A murmur spread. Some flinched. Others stiffened. Elias continued, his tone unwavering. We can run. Hide. Hope they leave us alone. He let the silence hang before shaking his head. Or we can make sure they never come back. A voice rose from the crowd. How? We don't have an army. Evelyn stepped forward, a tablet in hand. We don't need one. We have something better, a battlefield they don't understand. She turned the tablet, revealing a holographic map of Eden 7. Every pathway, every hidden ravine, every structural weakness of the colony highlighted like a hunter's trap. Elias pointed to the map. They expect open combat. We give them ambushes, sabotage, misdirection. We drag them into the mud and break them before they ever see us coming. A younger man, barely out of his teens, swallowed hard. You really think we can win? Elias met his gaze. Hard. Unshaken. I don't think, son, he said. I know. Fortifying the battlefield. The next 12 hours were a blur of preparation. The colony's drones were repurposed. Evelyn stripped them from farm duties and reprogrammed them into scouting units and explosive carriers. Civilians became fighters. Elias taught them how to shoot, where to aim, how to move like ghosts in their own land. Every street, every alley, every building was a weapon. Fuel reserves became firebombs. Water tunnels became hidden escape routes. Structures were rigged with traps that could crush advancing mechs. By nightfall, the colony was no longer a settlement. It was a kill zone. The council arrives. The first dropships appeared at dawn. Elias watched from a rooftop as the black-armored warships descended like vultures, blocking out the sun. Dozens of them. Hundreds of soldiers, their exocets gleaming, pulse rifles humming. Evelyn's voice came through his earpiece. They sent an occupation force. Elias nodded. Good. Means they won't expect to lose. The lead ship landed in the center of town. A perfect open, exposed target. The ramp lowered. Zilvarn stepped out, his expression a mask of controlled fury. Behind him, hundreds of elite council troops fanned out, securing the perimeter. Through hacked comms, Evelyn picked up his first order. Kill the elders first. First strike. Elias exhaled. Light them up. In an instant, hell rained down. Explosions ripped through the formation, flipping armored transports like toys. Snipers struck from unseen positions, taking out officers first. Drones swooped from the rooftops, dropping payloads onto tightly packed squads. The council soldiers scattered, confused, disoriented. They expected a battle. They got slaughtered. Zilvarn snarled, barking orders. Regroup! Counter fire! Then the gas lines exploded. A chain reaction tore through the streets, trapping the advancing forces in an inferno. Evelyn's voice came through the earpiece, mocking. Oops. Looks like you parked in the wrong place. Turning the tide. Zilvarn's remaining forces rushed into the alleyways, where Elias was waiting. He moved like a ghost. Old bones, sure. But he had muscle memory. Every step calculated, every shot precise. One soldier turned the corner, dropped instantly. Another raised his weapon. Elias put him down before he could blink. Close combat? They never stood a chance. The enemy ranks thinned rapidly. Those who survived broke, panicking, trying to retreat. Zilvarn realized too late. He had never been the hunter. He had always been the prey. The commander's desperation. From the command ship, Zilvarn watched his forces crumble. His breathing was ragged, his hands trembling. This was impossible. A human colony, **, just farmers and old veterans, was ripping through his troops like trained assassins. His second-in-command staggered into the room. "Sir, we need to withdraw," Zilvarn snapped. "No. No more retreating." His fingers flew across the console, activating a final order. "Deploy the war mechs." The mechs unleashed. The colony streets rumbled as 3-story-tall war machines stomped forward, their cannons glowing with plasma. The tide shifted instantly. Buildings crumbled under artillery blasts. Colonists were forced into retreat, their rifles useless against reinforced armor. The battlefield changed, from hunter to hunted. Elias cursed under his breath. They weren't equipped for this. But Evelyn? She had been waiting. From her workstation, she accessed the hijacked Council network. Her fingers moved fast. One override command. And the mech stopped. Then turned. And opened fire on their own troops. Zilvarn could only stare in horror. The final blow. With their own machines ripping them apart, the Council forces collapsed. Some surrendered. Some ran. Most didn't make it. Elias stood over the last few survivors. "Tell your bosses," he said coldly. "Eden 7 isn't worth the blood you'll lose." The remaining Council troops fled. The colony stood. And the legend of the Reapers of Eden had only just begun. The fires burned low. Smoke curled into the dawn sky, carrying the stench of war. The colony had survived. But Elias knew survival wasn't enough. Eden 7 was no longer just another forgotten outpost. It was a battlefield. The Galactic Council had suffered a humiliation they would never tolerate. And humiliation? It always demanded retribution. The price of victory. Elias walked through the ruins of the battlefield. Bodies lay in the dirt, some Council soldiers, some colonists. The price of defiance was steep. Too steep. He found Evelyn by the comm station, still at work. Her fingers danced over the console, rerouting power, scanning for enemy signals. "You should rest," he said. She snorted. "I'll rest when we're not one step from extermination." She pointed at the holo display. A flashing red beacon pulsed across the screen. An encrypted Council transmission. "They're regrouping," she said. "Another fleet is on the way." Elias studied the map. More ships. Heavier forces. No retreat. The next wave wouldn't be an occupation force. It would be an execution squad. Evelyn met his eyes. "We might not win this time." Elias nodded. "Then we don't fight the same way." A desperate gamble. If brute force wouldn't work, they needed a different strategy. Elias gathered the colony's best, tech specialists, ex-soldiers, and the most resourceful survivors. He laid out a new plan. "Direct combat won't work," he said. "But if we cripple their fleet before they land." A grizzled mechanic, Ortega, leaned in. "You're talking sabotage." Elias nodded. "We infiltrate their supply routes. Plant explosives inside their ships before they ever touch down." A silence fell over the room. "We have one problem," Evelyn said. "How the hell do we get onto a Council warship?" A slow grin crept across Elias's face. They wouldn't need to sneak onto a ship. They'd make the Council bring them aboard. The Trojan convoy. Under the cover of night, the colonists executed their plan. They captured a Council dropship from the wreckage. Repaired its transponder codes to fool enemy scanners. Disguised themselves as prisoners, injured, beaten, captured by loyalist soldiers. It was risky. One skin too deep, one suspicion too strong, and they'd be executed on sight. But they had no choice. Elias, Ortega, and Evelyn climbed aboard. Stripped of weapons, bound in fake restraints. Two trusted colonists piloted the ship, sending a distress signal to the nearest enemy war fleet. The bait was set. Now they just had to pray the enemy took it. Captured by the enemy. The Council command ship loomed ahead, a colossal dreadnought, bristling with cannons. The dropship was cleared for landing, guided into a cold, steel hangar lined with black-armored soldiers. As the ramp lowered, Elias felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. Sylvarn stood at the center, arms crossed. Bruised. Furious. Desperate for revenge. The commander's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. You survived longer than I expected. Elias let his shoulders sag. Played the role. The colony fell. He rasped. Your men took the town. These bastards. He jerked his head toward Ortega and Evelyn. Led the last resistance. We barely got out alive. Sylvarn studied him. Then, slowly, a smile. He bought it. He waved his hand. Take them to interrogation. The guards seized them. Shoved them forward. The moment was perfect. They were inside. Step 1 complete. A spark in the dark. Deep in the bowels of the warship, the colonists sprang into action. As soon as the guards turned their backs, Elias struck. A quick movement, a stolen blade, and a silent kill. Evelyn slipped her hands from the fake restraints. A small shock device, crafted from salvaged parts, overloaded the security system. The lights flickered, cameras scrambled. They were invisible. Ortega and the others got to work. Planting charges in critical areas, engine cores, weapon arrays, reactor lines. The plan was simple. They weren't here to hijack the ship. They were here to burn it down. But before they could finish, an alarm blared. They had been discovered. The breakout. Boots thundered through the corridors. Elias led them through the maze of steel hallways. He had memorized the ship's schematics from stolen data, every maintenance tunnel, every weak point. A squad of council enforcers rounded the corner. Pulse rifles lit up the dark. Elias grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon. 1 shot. 2. Enforcers collapsed before they could sound the alarm. Evelyn pulled up the ship's systems. I can lock the blast doors, but it'll trap us inside too. No choice, Elias said. Do it. With a single command, the doors slammed shut. They had minutes before reinforcements cut through. Ortega pressed the detonator into Elias's hand. We're set. Elias exhaled. Then let's leave these bastards in pieces. The fall of a warship. The team rushed toward the hangar. The stolen dropship sat waiting, but enemy forces swarmed the bay. No escape. Until Evelyn spotted something better. A council fighter, small, fast, made for quick deployment. Elias grinned. That'll do. They sprinted. Gunfire tore past them. Ortega staggered, a shot grazing his arm, but they kept moving. The moment they climbed in, Evelyn hacked the launch systems. The fighter roared to life, engines flaring. Brace! She shouted. The ship blasted out of the hangar, ripping into open space. Behind them, the warship detonated. Explosions cascaded through its hull, fire consuming its core. The dreadnought, a monument to the Council's power, broke apart, drifting into the void. The mission was complete. A war awakens. They touched down on Eden 7 to a cheering colony. The impossible had happened. They hadn't just survived. They had struck back. Elias looked at the crowd. Their people were battle-hardened now. No longer farmers, no longer refugees. Evelyn met his gaze. They'll send more. Elias nodded. Let them. Because now? The fight wasn't just for survival. It was for vengeance. The destruction of the warship was a message. A declaration of defiance. And the Galactic Council received it loud and clear. The gathering storm. Eden 7 skies burned crimson at dawn. Smoke still lingered from the last battle, but the colony was no longer just a settlement of survivors. It was a fortress. Elias stood atop a hastily reinforced watchtower, scanning the horizon. The Council would return. He had no illusions about that. They'll send more ships, Evelyn said beside him, adjusting the settings on a salvaged rifle. Bigger ones. Heavier firepower. They won't underestimate us again. They shouldn't, Elias replied. But they will. Ortega joined them, wincing as he flexed his bandaged arm. What makes you so sure? Elias smirked. Because they think humans fight with brute force. They still don't understand how we think. That was their advantage. That was their only hope. The return of Zilvarn. The Council fleet arrived sooner than expected. Through the colony's battered comms array, they intercepted an incoming transmission. The voice was unmistakable. Zilvarn. You insects have made a grave error. The commander snarled. You believe yourselves victorious, but you have only ensured your annihilation. The visual feed flickered. A fleet of Council warships hovered in low orbit. Not just one or two, dozens. Evelyn swore under her breath. Ortega's jaw tightened. Elias exhaled. This was it. A second transmission crackled through. A mechanical voice, cold, efficient. This is High Executor Luther of the Galactic Council. The rebellion ends now. Surrender, or we will erase your colony from existence. The ultimatum hung in the air. Elias leaned forward, pressing the transmission button. His voice was calm. Controlled. Come and try. A moment of silence. Then, a single response. Very well. Fire and fury. The bombardment began instantly. Orbital cannons unleashed hellfire upon the surface. The ground trembled. Buildings crumbled. But the colonists were ready. Hidden defensive batteries, salvaged from fallen Council ships, erupted in retaliation. Explosive rounds tore through the sky, striking enemy dropships before they could deploy ground forces. On the ground, Elias led the fighters into tight urban skirmishes. The Council's soldiers, used to open warfare, to overwhelming force, found themselves trapped in unfamiliar terrain. Corridors became kill zones. Alleyways turned into ambush sites. Every fallen enemy supplied the colony with weapons, armor, and ammunition. But the numbers weren't in their favor. For every enemy they cut down, 2 more landed. And then, the Council brought in the walkers. Monsters of war. Metallic titans, towering war machines, bristling with plasma cannons, stomped into the battlefield. Each step crushed rubble to dust. The colonists' rifles barely scratched them. Every shot fizzled against reinforced armor. Evelyn swore. We need a new plan. Elias already had one. Take out their legs. Ortega's team scrambled across rooftops, carrying improvised explosives. Grenades weren't enough. Rockets weren't enough. But gravity? That always worked. From the tops of crumbling buildings, the rebels dropped seismic charges onto the walkers. Explosions ruptured their joints, sending the mechanical beasts toppling into the streets below. One crashed into a Council blockade, crushing an entire squad beneath its bulk. The other landed on an ammo depot. The explosion that followed rocked the battlefield. Evenly matched? Not anymore. The commander's last stand. Zilvarn refused to accept defeat. The moment his forces faltered, he descended onto the battlefield himself. 6 feet of armored fury, his energy blades crackling with violet light. Cowards! He bellowed, cutting down colonists like they were nothing. Fight me! Elias stepped forward. Weapon drawn. You sure about this? Evelyn asked. Elias didn't look away from Zilvarn. He's their backbone. Take him out, and the rest break. The 2 warriors circled each other. One human. One alien. Then they clashed. Zilvarn's blade sliced through the air, missing Elias by inches. Fast. Brutal. Precise. Elias moved on instinct. Dodging. Weaving. Countering. But he was outmatched in strength, outclassed in speed. The alien commander grinned, victory assured. That's when Elias pulled the knife. Not an energy blade. Not an advanced weapon. Just a simple, old-fashioned steel knife. Zilvarn didn't react in time. He wasn't trained for human unpredictability. Elias drove the blade into his throat. The commander staggered. Choked. Fell. Silence followed. Then, the Council forces hesitated. And in that hesitation? The colony struck back. Victory, at a cost. By nightfall, the invaders were dead or retreating. The Council fleet pulled away from orbit, licking its wounds. Eden 7 still stood. But at what cost? Bodies littered the ground. Friends. Fighters. People who had believed in the impossible. Ortega sat against the wall, breathing heavily. We did it. Evelyn wiped blood from her face. For now. Elias looked toward the sky. The stars seemed darker than before. This wasn't the end. The battlefield still smoldered. Ash drifted in the air, carried by the wind like whispers of the fallen. Eden 7 had survived. But the fight was far from over. The weight of survival. Elias sat on a broken section of the colony's outer wall, hands wrapped around a blood-stained cloth. It wasn't his blood. Too many had died today. Footsteps approached. Evelyn. Her face was bruised, her jacket torn, but she was alive. We counted the dead, she said, her voice heavy. 73. Elias exhaled sharply. 73 souls. Ortega? He asked. Still breathing. Barely. He nodded. And the enemy? She scoffed. Scattered. Whatever's left of them ran with their tails between their legs. But the battle had changed something. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a symbol. Echoes across the stars. The Council's defeat on Eden 7 wasn't just a loss. It was a message. And that message spread like wildfire. The rebellion, once a fractured dream, began to take shape. Colonies rallied together, sharing weapons, supplies, and intelligence. Smugglers ferried messages through hidden channels. Even some Council defectors switched sides. And the Council? They panicked. In the halls of their ivory towers, High Executor Luther listened to the reports. His grip tightened around the armrest of his throne-like chair. How? He demanded. An advisor hesitated. The humans, they are unlike any species we have encountered. Luther's cold gaze burned into him. Then we burn them all. A turning point. A week later, the colonists gathered in the heart of Eden 7. The remnants of their home stood battered but unbroken. Ortega, despite his injuries, leaned against the supply crate. So what now? Evelyn crossed her arms. We rebuild. Elias shook his head. No. We prepare. Eyes turned toward him. He felt the weight of their expectations. He had never wanted to lead. But the fight had left him no choice. The Council won't stop, he continued. They'll come back stronger, more ruthless. And next time, it won't just be us they target. Silence. Then, a voice from the crowd. So we hit them first. Murmurs of agreement. A shift in the air. This wasn't just a colony anymore. It was an army. Forging the future. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Weapons were salvaged, defenses reinforced. Engineers modified stolen Council tech, turning it against its creators. Elias watched the transformation unfold. Farmers became soldiers. Mechanics became tacticians. Survivors became warriors. Late one night, Evelyn found him at the command table, studying tactical maps. You're thinking of leaving, she said. He didn't deny it. We can't just defend one planet forever. She sighed. And where would we go? Elias traced a path on the holographic display. Straight to the Council's heart. If they want to end us, he said, we make sure we end them first. Evelyn stared at him for a long moment. Then she smirked. Well, she said, I've always wanted to see the capital burn. The war begins. As the first human warships lifted off from Eden 7, the stars no longer seemed so distant. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war.